Hey everybody, I'm Bill Calkins with Ball Tech on Demand, and we are back with another installment of In the Break Room, an entire month of short educational sessions intended to help you get prepared to grow your best crops ever to send to market next year. We've covered the basics like vegetative propagation in a live webinar. You can find that webinar and all the videos in the series at growertalks.com/tech-on-demand. But now we're going to take a deep dive into one specific and very popular crop. This is one of 9 topics to cover this month, one for each Tuesday and Thursday. Hopefully you're taking some time each day to grab your phone, your laptop, your tablet, and head to the break room or a quiet spot to hear from Ball Tech on Demand experts. Today's topic is Calibrachoa, from start to finish to sold. And I'm happy to be joined by James Doukas, who's a territory manager with Ball FloraPlant and Selecta 1. And he helps greenhouses produce top-notch Calibrachoa. And during his career as a grower on the East Coast, he grew his share of Calibrachoa as well. He's the perfect guy for this topic. Welcome, James.
Hi, Bill. How you doing?
Doing great. So all the videos in this series are going to be collected and posted at growertalks.com/tech-on-demand. You'll find a few there already. And you're going to have to check that out for future viewing and to share with the rest of your team. And the link will be in the video description. But that's enough out of me. Let's get to the topic at hand. James, why don't you go ahead and share your screen and drop some Calibrachoa knowledge on the viewers.
All right, so let's start going with Calibrachoa from start to finish to sold. A lot of this presentation is going to kind of focus on building a good liner, because if you have a good liner for a Calibrachoa URC, you're going to have a nice finished product, whether it be a basket, a pint, a quart, whatever finish size you're going. We're going to build that structure in the propagation zone before we transplant. So let's get going. First, before you get cuttings in, any vegetative cutting or liner or anything of the sort, make sure you have sanitation that is going, and your cooler is clean, you're free of debris. Your benches and cart and trays are all sorted, clean, sanitized, and you got plenty of gloves for the sticking process, sanitizer for the hands. Ideally, you want to try and kind of minimize cross-contamination. You might want to do that from supplier to supplier, or you might choose to do between color and color, depending on how long your runs are. But some sort of delineation of rechecking and re-sanitizing the sticking area is essential in ensuring that, if there is some sort of contaminant or disease, that it doesn't spread throughout your propagation zone. So ensuring a good start, there's some important factors to consider. We want uniform tray manufacturing. You want a proper substrate for what we're sticking, which would be Calibrachoa. You want a DIBBLE, rooting hormones, and then any other PGRs that you like using in your propagation zone. Here's a good example here where LA pots are quite popular for propagation. Other soilless medias are as well, whether you're using a loose fill tray or using something like this. You want to make sure that the media is level in the tray, okay? Because not having that can create microclimates and uneven drying as the plants actually grow out. If you have a less volume retaining moisture, of course, that cutting in that cell is going to use more of the water available and actually could be a source later as it gets stressed out of pythium in a pot as its roots are getting damaged from drying out compared to the rest of the crop. All right, so you want to start with a level 4 wetness. We've kind of talked about the 1 through 5 of the medium moisture scale. Here, if we're talking in those terms, we're going to start with a medium wet, level 4. And you want to determine what your ideal wetness is. So you have uniform production coming off your line for sticking. All right. You don't want to stick anything into dry media ever. Calibrachoa is no different. Another thing that people kind of get hung up on is dibbling correctly and choosing the right size dibble for the crop. Now we're talking Calibrachoa, which is a very thin caliper stem. So you're looking more into your thinner dibble. The difference, depending on your operation, from using a very fine drip tube or pin versus using one of those really thick McDonald's straws. All right, and that would be something more for a geranium dibble we're talking something thin just so you can get the media out of the way, you can get the stem in there and get good contact. That's what you should want to kind of consider. Also with dibbling, figure out how you're going to go about in your operation of closing that dibble and making good soil to stem contact. Improper dibbling can lead to ununiform rooting. Right here, we see the guy at the top here rooted out pretty quite well. And then as we go down, we see a cutting that is barely getting its roots out. I would venture to guess that the dibble on that one is a little bit larger than the caliper stem that we have. And so it's got much more air around it. It takes longer for it to develop callus. And then actually that callus to shoot a root down is going to take longer as well, right? So we want good media to stem contact. And actually this could work for any sort of cutting that you are doing in your propagation zone. Typically, if you start to see some purpling or in your zone on something like a Calibrachoa, lobelia is famous for it. That means your dimple is a little larger and you're not getting that good media contact on that stem. Growing a better liner, we're going to need our cuttings out into the greenhouse. We got stages 1 through 4, and we're just going to quickly define them and talk about them a little bit in reference to Calibrachoa. So stage 1, we're trying to get our cuttings in. It can be anywhere from 3 to 8 days long. We're trying to get from an unroot to a callus. Ideal environment for this stage 1, where we're rehydrating the cuttings, is lower light intensity, 1,000 to 2,000 foot candles. You want to increase humidity from 85 to 95%. You want a relatively high air temperature, but more importantly here, you want your soil temperatures to be quite warm, okay? We're talking somewhere in the range of 70 to 75 degrees on your media temperatures, and minimize any unnecessary air movement at this time. You definitely don't want a draft from a door being opened where it's going to suck in air right onto your fresh new cuttings. That's going to cause shock. At the same time, repeated exposure can release, it can cause ununiform rooting. So first, you want to find the balance in this, right? So you want the light intensity and temperature to increase and the humidity to go down, as well as you want your mist requirements to go up, right? So this is what you want to factor in for your mist strategy here. Basically, we're at stage 1 here. So we want, to lower the light intensity, keep the temperature relatively constant, keep the humidity up, and that way we can have our mist be very active, but not too overactive, right? Because we can get in a situation where we are over misting, especially a crop like Calibrachoa, and that not only can lead to longer delays in rooting, but also a phenomenon that we see called tip abortion as well. So closely monitor your soil temperature. Make sure you have the right tools, thermometers, infrared thermometers also can work well. Just move that soil a little bit out of the way, shoot it. If you can check your temperature with it, you can check pretty much any other temperatures with it as well. So stage 1 here, we have some fertility, right? So many growers in this stage for Calibrachoa, I would recommend that we add a little bit of feed through the mist, somewhere, around 50 parts, maybe as high as 75 parts nitrogen through the mist. Calibrachoa is already a hungry plant, and putting out, from the stock plant, new roots, it's going to use some of that carbohydrate load that you have in the cutting. All right, so we want to make sure that as soon as we can add some fertilizer back in. Not everybody's system is set up to be able to feed through the mist, and that is perfectly fine. But when we can start to get some feed in, we should. Generally speaking, at this time of any propagation, a low phosphorus fertilizer would be recommended. Moisture management here, again, we're going from a 4, and we don't want to dry it down to a, we do not want to get somewhere into the 1 stage. Ideally, we're going from a 4 to a 3 in the first stages as we rehydrate and get a callus out. The biggest mistakes, take-home messages from stage 1 for getting your Calibrachoa cuttings are allowing the cuttings to dry down and wilt hard in the first few days. Avoid that, which will be bad. not monitoring your soil temperatures. So you might have a situation where you think that things are warmer and they're taking off and you should be developing callusing, but you're below your minimum temperature requirement. So you're either going to not develop callus at all, or you're just going to be, developing callus 3 to 5 days longer than you should. So you're almost a week before you see callus on a Calibrachoa cutting. Incorrect environment where you have too much air movement, too much light, and you have a low humidity can also cause challenges for Calibrachoa rooting. And then, as I mentioned a little bit before, overmisting in the first few days can lead to a lot of challenges. And overmisting is not limited just to frequent events. It can also be duration of the event that you're misting. Stage 2, we got a callus on it. We're going to hit roots to the end of the that liner cell wall, whatever we're using to root in. An example of a mist strategy that we have for stage 2 and actually going through would be that, we're trying to work off our night mist, right? So we're trying to get that off, aggressively get rid of that. And then we want to raise our day mist, right? So we want to avoid night, but also raise our intervals. So that way we have a little bit of drying going on in stage 2 to make sure that we have a forcing the root. We don't want to make the cutting not too happy during this stage. All right, we still need the cutting to eventually work out and put roots out. Some problems associated with overmisting and not weaning cuttings off. You have increased disease pressure because of botrytis. So we already got a lot of leaves on Calibrachoa. They're already very close to their neighbors. Botrytis can go through and go very rapidly through overnight if we're misting when we already have roots. We have increased algae growth and fungus gnats and surefly pressure. Fungus gnat larvae, like any stage in propagation, would be your number one pest that you're worried about, especially at this stage. And reduced fertility in cutting. You can eventually stall the cutting, right? So we're leaching out. We have no feed in our media. We're not providing any mist, right? So we're in stage 2, and we have roots that will accept the feed, but we're not putting anything back in for it to accept, for the Calibrachoa to accept. You can stall the cutting to where it's just going to sit there with a few roots and not really move on top. Also, you can have a problem with saturated soil and then slow roots, like I talked about prior. You need, at this stage, you should have rapid roots going down to the bottom of the cell. If they sit there and they've stalled over the past couple days, then start to question what's really going on here. Am I providing too much of an environment where they're nice and happy and they're not really rooting out, or am I not providing enough feed? There is a cause, and just kind of troubleshoot through that. Here's an example of why not to overmist here, right? So you see that tip has basically accepted all the water from that mist events repeatedly and gotten to the point where you've actually destroyed the tissue of that cutting, right? You can see up there on the upper right-hand corner, the cutting had pushed out beyond that tip, and now you have almost a self-pinching sort of occurrence, but we would like to avoid that because once you take out that tip, you're talking about stalling a number of days, right? And we're in a tight production schedule. We're going to miss our transplant, potentially pushing back sales windows. There's really no need for that sort of thing to pop up, right? So just be cognizant of, yes, we need to rehydrate in stage 1, and then we still need to have mist pretty decently in stage 2. We just don't need over. Ideally, in stage 2, we're getting down to a 4 to 2 in our media for moisture management. And we want to make sure that we have, that the roots aren't stalled, right? So when we say go to a 2, we don't want any wilting to occur. It's fine if there's a slight little gray look, but we don't want to get it to where we're starting to wilt our cuttings. Fertility is just as important, if not more important here in stage 2, because by this time, the cutting's starting to use all its stores that it had. If you hadn't been applying any sort of feed through the mist, at this point is when you want to start supplementing feed into your program, somewhere between a 75 to 100 ppm of nitrogen. Again, a low phosphorus feed is good. Just keep in mind that you might need additional iron as well if you're using a low nitrogen fertilizer, and that's perfectly fine. You want to avoid certain ammonium type nitrogen forms, right? So you don't have stretchy, elongated, soft growth at this point. And this is where we kind of get into our stage 2 PGRs, right? This is the first time you should really use PGRs in your crop. In some vigorous varieties, you may want to do it at time a little bit after stick, but generally speaking, stage 1 to stage 2 should be relatively rapid. So you're not missing anything by applying once you have a little bit of roots out. And you want to use something soft, like a Psychocell or a B9, something that you can stack the nodes on prior to pinch or prior to using some branching PGRs. IPM at this stage is where you're going to get your fungus gnats, right? So the larvae is either going to chew around or chew on the base of that cutting. And this is where we would want to really have a plan for dealing with fungus gnat larvae in our propagation zone. Calibrachoa, since you're misting heavily to get it to rehydrate, creates a nice environment initially for the fungus gnat larvae. And so that's what you really want to be targeting. So whether you have some chemical control, really at this stage, nematodes almost need to be applied religiously. And sometimes it can be a little bit more cumbersome to use that sort of system. Especially because things are moving so rapidly in and out. But if you have it on a weekly order, nematodes also work very well in propagation. But definitely have a plan for dealing with fungus gnats when you're dealing with Calibrachoa. Biggest mistakes of stage 2, overmisting, not starting to fertilize in the crop and watching it stall on you, and then oversaturating to a level 5, and truthfully neglecting your IPM, right, for your insect control or your disease control, right? So stage 2, I mean, if you're a little long on your night mist is when you should be making sure you're putting a preventative on for botrytis at the very least. All right, stages 3 and 4, this is where it's critical to where you can save yourself time in the finished container by bulking and then toning this URC, right? So in these stages, they're similar, right? We're changing the environment, we're building a root system, we're bulking the top, we're pinching and PGRing if necessary. And then of course, stage 4 toning. So in stage 3, we got a rooted cutting, right? We're gonna bulk it up and put all those roots on it. So we need an active environment, right? We need light levels increasing, and temperature and humidity decreasing, right? So we're out of that high temperature requirement for rooting and to initiate roots into the media. Here's where we can kind of soften on our temperatures, save a little bit of heat, but also make our plant tops more durable. We're all about stage 3 is building some additional root mass. And how do we build root mass? Right now, we're taking down good wet dry cycles from a 4 to a 2, right? And this is an example of how you would, monitor your moisture level of your media, and then bulking on our top. So when we say bulking, talking about the foliage that you have on top, and it is good at this, prior to going in, know what you want coming out. What is acceptable for you coming out? Do you need many growing tips? Do you need 3 inches on top? Do you need a huge diameter spread before you go to transplant? What do you actually define in your operation as a good Calibrachoa input for your finished container? And it is perfectly acceptable to have within your own operation and ability differing ideas of what you want. You might want a 50 cell Calibrachoa liner going into your hanging baskets versus a quart liner. You might only want a small 102 with a few branches just because you don't really need that huge bulk going into your finished container. All right, but this is a critical spot because you only have 2 to 3 weeks, and this could set you up into your finished container very nicely. Fertility, you're going to increase fertility again to 75 to 150 parts nitrogen, again using a fully balanced fertilizer. Remember that most fertilizers don't really deliver a 1 ppm at 200 parts per ppm nitrogen. So meaning that if you're using a lower ppm of nitrogen, you might need to supplement again at this time with a little bit extra minors as a full spectrum, or just a little bit extra iron. Pinching is very important in stage 3. If we're going to pinch, right, we want to make sure we pinch at the right time so we can get the liner on the right as opposed to the liner on the left. Liner on the left, we waited too long to pinch it, and by the time we did pinch it, when we pinched it down to the size we wanted, the base lateral came out and almost became completely dominant by the time we pinched, and then you have a lopsided liner. Stage 3 here, we got controlled growth and PGR usage. You can use temperature, can help you very well, but know the genetic potential of the varieties of Calibrachoa that you're using. Calibrachoa has a lot of vigors within its genus. You can have something that might barely get over the edge of a 6-inch pot, right? And then you have something that in 2 to 3 weeks, it could easily dominate a 12-inch hanging basket after transplant. So know what genetic potential and vigor you have for your Calibrachoa going into what pot. And that will kind of let you have an understanding of, all right, I need to apply PGR in a respectful way to control the growth as I'm growing it and finishing it, or I just need to let it grow and fill in, and then I need to put the brakes on it by applying PGR late on the back end to hold. Again, in stage 3, you might want to use less reactive chemicals for your PGRs. So you're talking about your B9, your Cyclosil, your Arest even at lower rates. Some people have mastered a cheap, effective bonsai. However, I would not recommend that. But yes, big thing is here, use lower concentrations and frequent applications so that by the time you have it in you've transplanted your liner up, you're actively growing and you're not trying to metabolize that PGR from the liner stage still in your finished container. Biggest mistakes of stage 3, not changing the environment, poor moisture management, so you have poor roots going out, not pinching on time, poor fertility plan, and then misusing PGRs. I wanted to add this picture here because this illustrates here somebody who was using Pharrell in their liner production to kind of control the amount of flowering that they have going on within their Calibrachoa. This can be an effective strategy as long as you are aware that Pharrell, you don't want to get into your media because that can inhibit rooting. Applying here at this stage, you can see that somebody got the volume on it to knock out all the flowers in the middle of the trays, but on the edge of the trays, you can see some flowers starting to pop off still and not completely aborted. That is a volume issue with application, as you can tell. And then, this can actually help you because you don't have as many flowers going into your finished stage, which flowers at your finished stage prior to shipping really are just botrytis risks. In stage 4, toning your liner. This can be done very simply by moving these trays to a lower temperature environment and a higher light environment. But definitely, if able, do not skip this step and just go warm to warm. You will build a nice cellular wall that will be able to deal with different fluctuations. And depending on what region you are in North America, you might be required for you before sending it out to your customer, right? Because a warm plant going out to a cold overnight is a recipe for disaster. So just an example of some hanging basket production here. You know, you've built your nice liner. We're now going to transform it into this nice million bells hanging basket. So we're producing a low vigor variety hanging basket. The strategy that I would recommend here is you're going to push early and hold or tone later. PGR may be needed, but first use low rates. All right. Pinch in the liner and it'll help fill you out in the hanging basket. You might not need to pinch the hanging basket at all, right? So this is what I mean by genetic selection and also building a nice liner prior to transplanting in a situation where you're doing a lower vigor variety in a smaller hanging basket. That's where you can minimize the number of touches that you're doing as you're growing the Calibrachoa. In a more medium vigor hanging basket, you're going to pinch the liner and evaluate and maybe second pinch them in 2 to 3 weeks after transplant. A tank mix such as a B9 Forel could be helpful to you in filling out a larger hanging basket, right? So that way, but keep in mind that if we're going to apply Forel, it's going to delay when our first flower is going to be. So we want to make sure that we're not applying it late enough that we're going to miss our sales window for our target of our crop. Otherwise, Forel is not a good option for PGR. And then we can additionally, with the increased vigor, you might want to tone it late with a 2 to 4 ppm bonsai, pack low drench, whatever you prefer. Rates may need to be a little bit higher if we're using something more vigorous, such as some of the Super Pills varieties, or you know, something that it's got a ton of horsepower behind it. An example of a medium vigor kind of schedule here. So, you know, this is kind of what we've talked about, 5 weeks of propagation here, and then you have 9 weeks of your finish, and you have your plan of when you're going to be applying your PGRs, right? And let's see what that looks like. So, all right, so you have a medium vigor. This is your liner treatment. We're sticking at week 6. We're doing a B9 Forel tank mix on week 8, probably the late part of week 8. And then week 9 to 10, we're pinching it. And then we're transplanting on week 11. Then we have here, you know, you transplanted your liner week 11. You've filled out your basket. You know, almost looks like little shrubs going into your finished container. Continuing on, we get into week 15, 4 weeks later. Think about your first PGR application in the finished container to control the vigor. Notice these guys have kind of grown out pretty evenly here, covering over, and because of the Forel that we apply, we don't see a lot of flowers on these quite yet either. So comment on that. You know, if you're not doing a program like that and you're more of a strategy where you like to apply PGR later, a recommendation would be, you know, apply your first PGR 3 to 4 weeks after your transplant, and then again when you're 70 to 80% of your finished spec, right? So, you know, these are two different options here, and they're very similar, right? So you're scheduling out when your PGR is going to apply, but maybe you might not line up as perfectly for you. So it's better to look at it like, okay, I should apply my PGR when I'm 70 to 80% of my finished size. Might be a better way for you to view when to apply your PGRs to your Calibrachoa. But be sure to PGR on time. All right, timing of PGR applications for Calibrachoa is the difference between a controlled hanging basket on the left and one that's going to have to be trimmed on the right. And example of finishing Calibrachoa quartz, we did all that nice work in a liner. Well, we don't really have to do much when we go to a quart. Simply, we can just do a light PGR application. That is all that's maybe needed, but maybe our vigor is so low with this variety that we don't really need to do any more PGR in our Calibrachoa in our finished container in this small pot. We just need to focus on pushing growth, right? And that's really knowing what genetics you're ordering for what pot size. In Calibrachoa for IPM, as far as finished is concerned, watch for aphids. Have a plan and spray preventatively to keep your populations low. Everybody likes to hang your baskets up to utilize the space more, but a drench application for preventing aphids is much more costly versus sprays. So just make sure that you have a low population before you even go hang up. That way you can get more longevity for yourself and also your consumer, right, in their garden center before it ends up in somebody's house. Thrips, only 2 life stages can be controlled by sprays. Therefore, you want to do a preventative plan. But if you're producing spring crops, a preventative plan for thrips should be part of your everyday IPM. And really, Calibrachoa doesn't have any, specific issues, right? It's not quite like I would say a Gerber, right? For example, is sort of a thrip magnet. So you definitely want to watch that. Just like any flowers, Calibrachoa is really not special when it comes to thrips. They will attack it. So just include them in your preventative rotations. And then your top diseases really for your finished IPM are your botrytis. Botrytis, you have all those flowers and those they're gorgeous. And the reason why consumers truly love Calibrachoa and to purchase Calibrachoa, but in our neck of the woods, they can also be issues, right? So spray and do the preventative botrytis sprays. You get in some cloudy weather, you might want to spray beforehand. Second, we have powdery mildew, really, which depending on what region you are in North America, around the Great Lakes, you are lucky, not so lucky, but you do have a strain powdery mildew that will go from Verbena to Calibrachoa and back and forth. It's not as prevalent in other parts of North America, but just be cognizant of that. So I would recommend too that we just have an idea about our dew points. That way we're not creating situations that are favorable to powdery mildew. In particular, in those regions, I'd recommend maybe a preventative spray before we hang up our hanging baskets for our Calibrachoa, trying to get as much longevity as possible, and also not create a environment that favors the development of powdery mildew. And finally, you have your Thabiopsis and your root and Pythium, which are 2 of your root diseases. Thabiopsis, definitely an issue, right? As far as make sure that you're using clean plastic, so you're not transferring from one crop to the next. Make sure you have healthy, a nice water source as well, so you're not putting this around. And then Pythium. Pythium gets in very easily on Calibrachoa, so you may choose in your operation to have certain drenches, just like you would with a poinsettia propagation. It's not as necessary, I would say, but be cognizant if you have like a very hard weekend dry down event, when you come in the morning on Monday and start to see everything wilting, not only should you try and rehydrate everything, but at some point, that some of your root mass got dinged by that event, that you should start to apply something preventatively to prevent the losses from Pythium being sent in. Hard dry downs are really, really something you need to avoid in your finished container. And then as far as media, pH, and EC, we talked about the iron needed additionally for most fertilizers within the propagating of Calibrachoa. This can occur again when you get into your finished media, right? So monitor your pH of your media. Make sure that your pH isn't drifting up too high. We want to be, somewhere around a 5.8. Okay, we don't want to be a 6.5. We don't want to be a geranium or a marigold, right? So this is why it's crucial that we monitor, and I would recommend maybe weekly or bi-weekly, that we just monitor to know which direction our media and our long-term pot sizes is drifting, right? Maybe even send out a sample to a lab once a month just to be confident and double check your in-house testing methods. But use a 2.1, a pour through saturated paste, whatever you have that you're more comfortable with. But the more important thing here is consistency. Don't do one method one week and then one method the next week, because the numbers, while related, won't be as comparable, right? And not every issue that you see on yellowing of Calibrachoa is just low feed, All right. It's not just something where we just got to crank up the feed on something, right? Check your pH. Depending on what region you are in North America, your water source might naturally drift up, right? And in that case, you know, you're already injecting some acid more than likely into your irrigation. But you can, depending on your sophistication or size of your operation, if we know that we need a low pH media for our Calibrachoa, one of the easiest things could be to increase our low pH media order and just make sure pansies and Calibrachoa get planted in low pH media. Now, some things you want to keep simple, stupid. So you don't want to necessarily overly complicate things, but in certain operations, it could actually lessen your headaches on the back end. And those are just, you know, some of the key points in Calibrachoa production, naturally. And anything, there's any plants, there's many ways to grow a plant. Feel free to reach out to my email, and you know, that's it for today.
That's awesome. I think, you know, one thing that I will remind the viewers is you talked a lot about the water levels and propagation primarily, and we do have a video from this in the break room series on training your team to water properly. So I'll put that link in the description of this video, or you can just go back in the playlist and find that video from Dr. Will Healy. He covered that in depth, and I think that would probably be a good one to review, since James did talk a little bit about, you know, watering to a level 4, drying down to a level 2, and what exactly that means. I did notice you also talked a little bit about weighing trays, which is something Dr. Healy gets into as well. So thank you, James, so much for spending time in the break room covering Calibrachoa. You know, I think it's pretty clear from your presentation style that you've seen a lot of this happen in the greenhouse, whether that was as a grower or in your years consulting with growers. You know, it occurred to me your style is very educational, but it also includes a lot of real world examples. So I appreciate that, and I'm sure the viewers do as well. So thank you so much, James.
Hey, if you've ever had a mistake or something happened in your greenhouse, you better believe that you're not the only one that's ever happened. So
Very true.
Just try to figure out a solution more so than focusing on the problem that already happened in the past.
Excellent. I think that's great advice. So before we close, just another reminder that all the videos from the Ball Tech on Demand in the Break Room series are collected at growertalks.com/tech on demand. Includes the live webinars on vegetative and seed propagation, watering, photoperiod, perennials, and a whole lot more throughout this month of October. So that's it for today, and on behalf of James, I'm Bill Calkins with Tech on Demand, wishing you all the best as you produce your stunning Calibrachoa crops for next spring. Take care.